is usually stranger than fiction. The purpose of these shows are not to scare you, but to prepare you, because what you don't know could hurt you. The word says in Hosea 4:6, "My people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge." Thank you for joining us. My name is Julie, and here is the host of the show, Barry Meyer.
Radio Free Readout begins in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Welcome, patriots, redoubters, lovers of liberty and freedom. I'm John Jacob Schmidt, your host, and my name is your name too, because we all share the same concerns and realize the importance of sticking together. But we're here to inform, encourage, equip, and organize the effort that has come to be known as the American Redoubt Movement.
Greetings, Patriots. This is Chris Walsh, broker at Revolutionary Realty, located in the heart of America's Great Redoubt, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. I sell land and backwoods cabins to America's Patriots every day. Creeks, springs, timber, and game, good survivable property without natural disasters. The state of Idaho has a balanced budget, and our people believe deeply in the Second Amendment. Call me today at 208-667-1776 or visit me online at www.revrealty.us. I'll be glad to serve you, and God bless America.
In defense of a nation, one nation, under one God. Today's headlines, tomorrow's events. Stay with us for a biblical perspective of the news, and it all begins in 20 seconds.
We have a gentleman named Mike Tuttle, and he is running for sheriff here in Cheyenne, Wyoming, which is Laramie County here in Wyoming. And I got to talk to him here just a few days back, and the information that I seen him bring out, I believe that this is a man that God really wants to put to the forefront, and I'm really asking that you would really listen to what he has to say. I ask that give attention to what's being said, because he's going to say some stuff that, quite honestly, could probably blow your mind, because he knows law so well. So, Mike, welcome to End Time Talk Radio.
Thank you very much, Barry.
Well, Mike,
and, go ahead.
Go ahead. I want you to go ahead and introduce yourself to the people and why you're running for sheriff.
Okay. Well, I'm from Cheyenne, Wyoming. I was born here. My mother was born here. My grandmother, my great-grandfather was on the original Frontier Days Committee.
Oh, really?
As a matter of fact, he was the mayor, I believe it was, from 1901 to 1906, and he's was on the original Frontier Days Committee, and my mom had some of the original stationery, and he was part of the water project that had to do with crystal and granite and all that stuff up there. Mm-hmm. So my family's been around for quite a while, and I love this state, and I love God, and I love my family, and I just hate to see what's going on in this country, and especially in Laramie County. We have a sheriff that's violated his oath several times, and I had no dreams of being the sheriff at all. I never even thought of being the sheriff until a few things happened this last year, a year and a half ago. And what it was the IRS went and started putting seizure notices on a friend of mine's property. He has 20 acres. 10 acres has a shop on it, and the other 10 acres has his house on it. And they started putting seizure notices on the shop, saying that they were going to seize the property. So he came to me because I've made it, kind of a big thing in my life to know a lot about the IRS and what's really going on and the laws. And I got into that because, well, I think I could probably thank Joe Bannister. If anybody out there knows who Joe Bannister is, Joe Bannister was a special agent from the IRS. I heard him on the radio one day, and he's saying that he was out he'd seized property for the IRS, and he heard on the Debbie Kidd show on a radio program that there was no law requiring you to pay income tax because it's against the Constitution, and none of the money goes to the federal government. And it perked my ears up. I thought, well, you know, I've heard those rumors, but is it true? He made about $80,000 a year, I think it was, and he finally decided to do his own little investigation himself. So he did I believe it was a 90-page report, and he turned it into his bosses at the IRS, and they told him to attend his resignation. And he said, well, I really like my job and everything, but I need to know the law because I'm a Christian. Mm-hmm. And by taking other people's property without any due process and without any laws saying I could do it, he could do it, that he wanted to know where the law was, and they just kept telling him to attend his resignation. So he found out right there that, you know, this is all a big farce. So I started getting into it there. So I learned the income tax laws, and so I told this guy that the IRS came out and put the seizure notice on to go to the Secretary of State's office and do a lien search on his property, and he'd probably find out there was no liens. And sure enough, he paid, I think it was $10, got a lien search and found out there was no liens on his property. So the IRS has to go through the Secretary of State's office if they do it legally to put a lien on your property, because the IRS is foreign to Wyoming. So therefore, according to the codes, they have to go through the Secretary of State's office, and then a notice of lien. A lien has to be filed at the Secretary of State's office, but a notice of lien can be filed at either the Secretary of State's office or the County Clerk's office. But you have to have a lien first. And he went up there, and of course there was no lien. So he came back to me, and I told him, well, go up to the IRS office and ask him to show you where your liability is. And he had an IRS code book, and I showed him under liability to ask him, because you don't have to pay a tax unless you're liable for it. So he went up there and did that, and they wouldn't answer any questions. So he came back to me, and I said, well, let's see what's going to happen next. Well, the next thing they did was they put a notice in the newspaper, a legal notice, saying they were going to seize it, that they were going to auction his property off at the county clerk's office. Well, the sheriff came into my business a lot, you know, not a lot, but once or twice, sometimes 3 times a month, and mm-hmm. and he'd have dinner with his wife or with his brother or some friends. And so I confronted Danny, and I said, this is what's happening here, and there's no court order. There's no due process. They're using code sections out of alcohol, tobacco, and firearms to enforce Title 26 IRS laws, I guess you could say laws. Mm-hmm. And so all of it was bogus. So I showed all that stuff to the sheriff, and I said, you have to stop this, because he's the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in any county. And he's hired. A lot of people think that the Game and Fish is above the county sheriff and the highway patrol and all kinds of stuff, but that's not true. The sheriff is the only one law enforcement officer in this nation, in any county, that is elected, and that's what gives him all his power, because he's elected by the people themselves. The chief of police isn't, the highway patrol isn't, the Game and Fish isn't. So it's pretty important to understand that. And by the way, Barry, I think I asked you if you knew where the word sheriff came from.
No,
Remember that?
No, I don't.
Okay, the word sheriff came from about a little over 1,000 years ago in England. When a village would become 100 people or more, it was called a reeve, and so they would elect a shire to protect them on that reeve. So there's the word shire reeve, and that turned into sheriff in our nation.
Oh, you know what? I think I actually remember hearing that from somewhere, but yeah, very true. We actually do get a lot of our things from our past, which people don't realize where we get it from.
Exactly. You know, this is the greatest nation in the world, and we're light years ahead of any other nation, or used to be, because it's the only nation in the world that was founded in a belief in God. No other country can say that. And that's what makes this nation so great, is we have all this freedom, because freedom comes from God. It doesn't come from a man. If freedom comes from man, then man will take your freedom away. And I think this nation, we need to get on our knees again in this nation, because everybody's turned away from God. Most people have turned away from God. They don't think they need God. And I think, go ahead.
I think it's just so important what you're saying. We have forgotten our roots. We're the only nation where Christianity started right in the center and went out. Most nations, Christianity is trying to get into with missionaries and that. And I think it's so important to know our roots, and we have forgotten that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's what it was. De Tocqueville came to this country, and he said he didn't find it was the greatest country he's ever seen, but he didn't find the source of it in any place until he found it in the churches. And we had the freedom to worship. And that's what makes it so great. We have the freedom to worship. And look at it now. The whole purpose of the school system was started, the public school system, so that the children would learn to read and write so they could read the Bible. And now look how it's turned around the other way, to where they don't even allow you to. In some places, you can't even mention God.
True.
And that's how bad it is. But the reason I'm running for sheriff is because I'm a very devout Christian. I love God. I go to church every day, and I can see what's happening in this country, and I can see the reasons for it being. And we have a sheriff he's not following his oath, and he allowed it. When I showed the sheriff all this information on this guy's property, he said he would take care of it. Well, the day he was supposed to take care of it, which was April 19th, over a year ago, we went down to the county building, and the sheriff decided he was going to leave town, and there were policemen running around the county building, and we thought that was kind of strange. There was me and about 10 other Tea Partiers, and we wanted to go down, and if anybody was going to bid on this guy's property, we wanted to let him know, and we had flyers and everything to let him know that there's no due process, there's no court orders, no anything, and so they would be bidding on property that wasn't legally taken. So we get down there, and in their legal notice in the paper, it said that the registration for the auction was 9:30, and the auction was going to be at 10 o'clock. Well, we got down there about 25 after 9, and we went in and we asked the deputies inside, well, where do you register for this auction? And they didn't know anything, and we thought that was awfully strange. And what else was strange was there was a lot of policemen running around inside there. We thought that was kind of strange, but maybe they were there for another case or something. Well, at about 25 minutes to 10, here come the two IRS agents came through the front door, and I kind of figured that's who they were because I talked to one of them on the phone. Her name is Darlene Shade.
Okay.
And the other guy's name was Tim Billick, I think it was. And so I walked over and I confronted Miss Shade. I said, Miss Shade, do you have a court order allowing you to auction this man's property off? She said, we don't need a court order. And I said, well, can you tell me how you can step over this man's constitutional rights, and where do you get the power to do this auction? She says, sir, I'm not going to argue with you. I said, ma'am, I'm not arguing with you either. I'm just asking you a question. Where did you get any authority to step over this man's constitutional rights without a court order and auction his property off? And she immediately goes silent, and the police surround her and take her off into a back room. So I look over at this deputy sheriff, and I said, Deputy, what are the cops doing down here? And he says, well, our jurisdiction's in this building. Theirs is out on that sidewalk. So I pointed toward the front door, and I said, you mean out on that sidewalk's not in the county? I mean, that sidewalk's there is not in the county? And then he shuts up. Now he won't talk.
Okay.
Well, we found out late. So at 10 o'clock, here the IRS agent, two IRS agents surrounded by the police, came out of a back room. They walked out onto the front walk, and they're on one side, and the 11 of us are on the other side. And she's reading off all this stuff, which I have a copy of, and it's all ATF code sections, and it has nothing to do with this man. And she gets done reading it, and she says, 10,200 going once, 10,200 going twice. And the guy standing next to me says, to who? And she says, mailed in sealed bid. But if you look at their legal notice in the paper, there's nothing about mailing in bids. And the guy next to him says, to who? And she points at the IRS agent next to her. So now we know the fix is in. They're just trying to steal his property. So the cops surround him, and they take him back into the building. And by the way, the cops looked at us, and they started laughing at us. So I told the guy that owned the property, if anybody steps foot on your property and says that they own it, just get on the phone and call us, and then call me, and I'll get a hold of some other people, and then get on the phone and call the sheriff's department and tell them that there's somebody trying to steal your property, tell them where you live, and that you have a gun, and then hang up. And that way, if you hang up, then they're going to immediately send people out. And then that way, the sheriff's department has to get involved.
Okay.
Well, as it turned out, within 2 weeks, we find out, he comes back into me and he says they got a quit claim deed on his property. And what happened was, we didn't know it, but a guy followed them in, that the two IRS agents and the police back into the county building, and this guy says, I'll give you $10,400 for that property. So he either wrote him a check or gave him the money, and they got a quit claim deed on it. But a quit claim deed just means that you're quitting the claim to something that you have a claim to. And they didn't have a claim to it anyway, so that isn't even valid. So to make a longer story short, we got a hold of the guy that did that roundabout through a friend of his, and told him if he even sets foot on there, he'll never own the property, and he finally admitted he'll never try it. So you see things like this going on in our county, and we need somebody to step in and stop this.
You know, I was Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Well,
Did you ever hear that story in the paper about that guy that they pulled over and they thought he was DUI, but he wouldn't do a breathalyzer? It was in the paper one day in Cheyenne.
You know, I don't remember that.
Well, he wouldn't do a breathalyzer, so they took him up to the hospital, and 5 policemen held him down while the guy at the hospital stuck a needle in his arm and drew blood.
Oh, I think I do remember that, but it was very brief and passing. I didn't have a chance to really read the whole thing.
Yeah, it was one day. They hushed it all up after that because, well, the chief of police got on KGAB radio, and I called in when he was on there, and I said, Chief Kozak, do you have a Constitution? And he says, yes. I said, do you ever read it? And he kind of got, smirky and said, well, yeah. I said, then you ought to know that by holding this man down and sticking a needle in his arm, that you violated his Fourth Amendment rights, which say that you can't be, prohibits the, I'm sorry, getting a little mixed up here.
Oh, that's fine.
The Fourth Amendment, which says you're securing your person. The Fifth Amendment, which says you can't be required to be a witness against yourself. And Article 6, which says you're bound by this Constitution. And before he could even answer, Dave from the radio station says, well, that's for the courts to decide. And I said, you mean it's for the courts to decide whether the Constitution is constitutional? And he hung up on me.
You know,
so,
I know Dave so often does not listen to logic of what's going on. And many of the people that are listening, they won't even know what's kind of going on, except if you guys go to my YouTube site, you can hear some different conversations that I've picked up, and you can actually listen to KGAB, especially things that are really important. Mike, before I forget, I want to make sure that you mention that you're being endorsed by Richard Mack, Sheriff Richard Mack.
Yeah, that was really a thrill for me because there's a place called Caritas out in Alabama, and I went out there to do some electrical work twice, and it's really, you see, I'm a Catholic, and what this is about is people that don't know about Our Lady of Fatima or Our Lady of Guadalupe or Our Lady of Lourdes. Our Lady appeared to 6 visionaries in 1981 in Medjugorje, Yugoslavia, and she said she's going to give 10 messages to each one of them, and when she's given all 10 messages to each one of them, she'll never appear again on this earth because something big's going to happen. And 3 of those visionaries, there's 2 boys and 4 girls. 3 of the visionaries, which is 2 girls and 1 of the boys, have received all 10 messages. The other 3 have received 9 of those messages. And Richard Mack went out to this place, and when he saw what it was all about, from what they told me, he was converted, meaning he's a true believer in what's going on, and that Our Lady's appearing. And there's many places in history where you can see that people have testified to this. Of course, the news media doesn't want you to know this. And Richard Mack, while he was out there, they told him about me, about I sound like Richard Mack, and they told him that I was wanting to run for sheriff, and so he said he would endorse me. So they called me up and said they wanted to, and I was supposed to go meet with him this last summer, but with Frontier Days and all that other stuff and with my business, I couldn't do it. But I'm planning on going to meet him before the election season starts, meaning before summer.
Okay.
And go talk to him personally, because there was a case just recently down in Florida, and it was Sheriff Finch, I believe it was. And if you go on Richard Mack's website, you can find this story where they threw the governor of Florida and the attorney general for Florida had this Sheriff Finch thrown in jail, his own jail, because he wouldn't take a gun away from somebody that had every legal right to own this gun.
I remember that.
And yeah, and he got off. And even Sheriff Mack said this was so ridiculous and trumped up, it was laughable. And when they got it into court, the prosecuting attorney or the attorney general made a fool of himself. I can't remember which one it was, but they send me messages on all that stuff all the time too. So Richard Mack is very, very outgoing, and he gets around this country, and he tries to teach sheriffs how to be the 10th Amendment sheriffs, and that's what I want to be. It's the 10th Amendment sheriff.
One
the Constitution is the only way to go, Barry.
Oh, definitely. The one thing I find out is so many Christians will not stand up for God. So many Christians will not stand up for the Constitution, and they will not stand up for their fellow man here in America. You're willing to do that. You're a man that's willing to lay his life on the line to serve other people, and that's the highest honor, I would say, of anyone.
That's the way I feel about it. I give my life for my country and for the truth and for God. I mean, it's wrong what's going on in this country, and if people don't start standing up, that's why this nation's falling behind, because I've got some information I told you I was going to give you. It's called American History You Never Learned, and we talked about it a little bit when you were talking to me the other day. What was the worst year in the history of this country?
Well,
Do you know what that was?
The Revolutionary War, wasn't it?
Nope, it was 1963.
Okay.
And everything started changing in 1963. Now, there was the Cuban Missile Crisis. There was John F. Kennedy was killed. But the main thing that happened in 1963 that was the worst thing was Madalyn Murray O'Hair convinced the Supreme Court to take prayer out of schools.
True.
And when you see, the absence of God is evil. When there's no God, then what fills the void?
Evil.
And you see what's happened in our schools. Back then, before 1963, probably the three big problems in school was chewing gum, tardiness, and talking in class. Now it's drugs, guns, and pregnancies. And you see, we have a leader of this nation right now that is, he doesn't seem very, he doesn't believe in God. It doesn't look to me.
Very true. Very true. That's what I like about you, and really why we have to support somebody that's willing to state their life. And let's put it this way. One thing I find out in a foxhole, there's no atheist in a foxhole. And sometimes you're almost better being with an atheist than with a lot in the church. And I'm not trying to dog a lot in the church, but they're not doing anything. And I want to get this point across to people that you're doing something, and people need to get behind it. A man that's willing to be a leader.
Well, what does the Bible say that to those who don't have much, not it will be taken away, and to those that do have a lot, you will be given more. But
True.
I think what that means is when God gives you these gifts, you better use them.
Very true.
And the people that everybody's been given gifts, but if you don't go do something with those gifts, and my gift has been to know law, to know the IRS code, and to know the Constitution, and to know the truth. And without the truth, we're lost. And there's you know, this is funny. I had my brother ask people when they came into my business. There's a lot of truck drivers that come through. I said, ask him this question and see what response you get. If you commit a crime, you're guilty, true or false. And you wouldn't believe the response he got. This one guy says, if you commit a crime, you're guilty, true or false. The guy says, you're false. He says, why is it false? Well, because you haven't been convicted in a court of law.
Yeah.
He says, you mean if I go out and stab every tire on your truck, that I haven't committed a crime?
Mm-hmm.
He says, well, yeah. He says, well, then it's not false. It's true. When you commit a crime, you're guilty,
mm-hmm.
flat out. So it's amazing how up is down and down is up, and woe unto him who calls evil good and good evil. You know?
Right. Very true. You know, we need people to understand the Constitution. One of the things, Taylor Haynes is running for governor here in Wyoming. He wants everyone to learn the Constitution, to know it as elected officials. Would you have your deputies to understand what the Constitution says?
That would be my first order of business. They will learn the Constitution, because I'll tell you, if those deputies that were down at the county building, when those IRS agents were down there with the police and auctioning that off, if they would have known the Constitution, they should, well, they maybe could know the Constitution, but they better have
mm-hmm.
the guts to stand up for it.
True.
Because without that, you know, it's not going to work.
You know,
and you know what misprision of felony is?
What's that?
Misprision of felony is what those guys were doing was they're helping those IRS agents steal that property without due process, and that's a felony and a federal crime under Title 18, Section 241 and 242. And misprision of felony is somebody that has the power to stop that, which was the deputy sheriffs, and they didn't do anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
So they're just as guilty.
Very true on that. Very true. You know, today when we talked about on the radio station, and when I called in about Riverton, with the EPA giving up Riverton now to the Indians, you know, it's kind of scary for me, because I shouldn't say scary, but overwhelming, because here I am. I don't know a whole lot, but I know a little bit. But when I called in, and I basically mentioned that, you know, policy always follows law. Law doesn't follow policy. I don't think many people get that. They don't realize that, like when I told the lady today, I said, you know, when you have a diamond ring and you put it in a box, and like for Christmas, you wrap it in a box and another box, and give it to somebody, they're going to open up that first box and think, well, there's nothing here. What I'm trying to say is that when you keep wrapping law up with policy after policy after policy, it may look good, it may smell good, it may be the color of law, but people have been accustomed to policies and not the law. And when you're under a policy, you're not protected by the law.
That's right. That's right. And who's the EPA? I mean, who gave them the authority to take a town, a city, and take it from one group and give it to another?
True. I mean,
who gave them that? Let me tell you a little story about OSHA. Came into my business one day. It was about, we opened up at 10, and at 9:45, they came in with one of my workers. They followed her in. This guy's got a camera around his neck. I said, who are you? He says, I'm from OSHA. I said, what are you doing here? He says, I'm going to look around. I said, you want to look around? He says, yeah. I says, then go get a warrant.
Oh.
So he turns around, goes back out the door. So I go down to Village Inn downtown and had breakfast with my mother, who's in her 80s, and just about done with breakfast, and that worker of mine calls me and says that guy's back out here with the deputy sheriff and a warrant. And I said, okay, I'll be right out. So I came out and I said, now why'd you bring a deputy? And he says, well, because every time we get a warrant, we always get a deputy. Mm-hmm. And see, now that the sheriff should have stopped that too.
Sure.
But so I said, well, what'd you find? And he says, well, I found a panel in your basement that's not marked, $750 fine. I found an outlet cover that was missing, $750 fine, and then another box where the wire was sticking out, $750 fine. So he's got me for he had me for four. Four violations, according to him. Now, do you know what a general warrant is?
No, I don't.
That's why we kicked one of the reasons we kicked King George out of this country. What the British were doing was they just get a warrant to go in and look to find something.
Oh.
So you can't do that. I mean, your warrant's got to say what you're looking for, what the crime is, who you're looking for, and where you're looking for. You can't just go in and look for things to go wrong. So now they've got me for let's see, it was $3,000 in fines. So I said, you got a few minutes? And he goes, sure. Well, I've been an electrician since 1974, so downstairs in my shop I had everything I needed. And the outlet cover wasn't missing. It was just broken. And the screw was still in it, and there was pieces of it. Somebody must have kicked it. So I went downstairs, and I got the outlet cover, a blank cover. I labeled the panel. I corrected everything. I walked up, and I said, no, I want you to go with me. So I took him through my business. I said, you see, I've corrected everything. I said, are we good now? And he says, well, yeah, we're good now, but we're not going to drop this. I said, you're still going to fine me $3,000? And he says, yes. I said, well, what happens next? And he says, well, my boss is going to call you in 2 weeks at this date and at this time of the day, and then you're going to have a conference over the phone. I said, okay, what's your boss's name, and what's the phone number? And he gave me that. Well, that day that he was supposed to call me, I called him. He says, and I told him who I was, and he says, well, we usually call you. And I said, yes, but I'm calling you. And I got a question to ask him. He says, what's that? And I said, well, are these 4 separate incidents? He says, yeah. I said, and they're not related to each other, are they? And he says, no. I said, let me read something to you. So I read the 7th Amendment to him. Any controversy over $20, a trial by jury shall be preserved. I said, I want 4 trials by jury. And I said, when I get your guy in the stand, I'm going to ask him where he gets his electrical expertise, what training he's had, and all that. And I said, by the time I'm done with him, I don't think you're going to want him on the stand. And he says, well, sir, I'll tell you what. We're going to drop all these, but I'm going to send you a letter, and I want you to sign the letter. And I said, oh, well, what's the letter going to say? He says, well, the letter's going to say that you'll have safety meetings. I said, well, why do I have to have safety meetings? I mean, why? How would they tell me to have safety meetings?
Yeah.
And he says, because I see on your record that there was a guy in your kitchen that spilled hot water on his feet. And I said, and a safety meeting is going to prevent that? He says, well, there's another guy that cut himself with a knife. And I said, and the safety meeting is going to prevent that? And he says, well, I'm going to send you the letter anyway. So he sends me this letter, but there was 2 letters. One letter says that I will do safety meetings, and the other letter he wanted me to sign was to say that I'm guilty of all 4 of those infractions. So I just threw it in the garbage. So he called about a week later, and he asked me if I was going to sign them. I said, no, I'm not signing anything. I'm not agreeing with anything with you, and if you want to go to court, let's go to court. And that was the end of it.
Really?
That was about probably 4 years ago, and that's how you handle these people. But it's just like that. Getting the deputy sheriff to come out to my business. What is the sheriff's office doing? They have better things to do than that. And here's another thing. The judge in Cheyenne that signed that warrant, it was an administrative warrant. I don't care about an administrative warrant. What's an administrative warrant? You see what I'm saying? And I wouldn't put up with that. You know, I was sitting with Pat Barrett one night. We were watching Monday Night Football. You remember? Did you know there used to be a sheriff few sheriffs ago?
I don't remember.
You don't remember the name?
No, I don't remember Pat Barrett, actually.
Okay, he was before, Alsop was the sheriff before Danny Glick.
Okay.
And the sheriff before that was Pat Barrett.
Okay.
And he's a good friend of mine. And Pat Barrett and I were sitting one night, and I said, hey, Pat, did the IRS ever come to the sheriff's department and ask to use a deputy to go out and seize property? He says, oh, yeah, that happened a lot. I said, are these the exact words they use? We need you to. We would like you to bring have a deputy go along with us to seize this property so that they can keep the peace. And he said, "Yeah, that's exactly what they said." I said, "Well, think about that. By you sending out a deputy, you just violated these people's constitutional right. Because, first of all, what is it? Where's the court order?" I said, "Did you ever ask them for a court order?" And he said, "No." I said, "Well, then how are they seizing property?" Here's what the IRS does. They call you up and say, you know what, Barry, you owe these taxes, and we're gonna your car will pay off this one tax bill. So we're gonna come out and seize your car.
Okay.
And so you say, okay. So they go to the sheriff's office. They borrow a deputy to go out quote, keep the peace. They come up to your door, they knock on your door, you look out, you see the IRS agent, you see the sheriff standing in the background, and the guy holds his hand out and says, give me the keys, and you hand the keys over. Did he seize that property?
Well, 9/10 of the law says if it's in your possession, I would say so because you gave the keys over.
No.
No?
Well, no, but he says, give me the keys. If you didn't give the keys, he didn't seize the property. He says, just give me the keys. So if you give him the keys, he didn't say, I demand you give the keys or anything. What I'm saying is, he never seized that property. You volunteered it.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
You see what I'm saying?
I do.
And that's what they did. And then, boy, Pat was just astounded. He goes, you're right. And I said, I'm telling you, this is nothing but a scam. And, you know, when I was on KGAB radio, and I say this to anybody that's going to hear what I'm saying tonight, and that is, I will pay anybody listening $10,000 if they can show me two things. Number one, the actual statute that requires you to pay a 1040 tax. It doesn't exist. Number two, how you can be required to send in a 1040 form without waiving your Fifth Amendment right. How can you be required by the government or by the IRS to give information that might incriminate you?
Yeah.
And I don't want this to sound like this whole thing's about the IRS. It's about constitutional rights. You either believe in the Constitution or you believe in the IRS. You can't have it both ways because they contradict each other. The Constitution says due process of law, and the IRS just goes and just does whatever they want. And nobody's standing there. I'm telling you right now, our sheriff right now is deathly afraid of the IRS, and so is the county attorney. I had the county attorney, Mark Voss, say straight to my face, I'm advising my client, Debbie Lathrop, to leave these notices of federal tax lien filed until you show me a court ruling that says I have to remove them. I handed him a Supreme Court ruling. I said, here's a Supreme Court ruling. He shoved it right back at me without reading it and said there's ways around Supreme Court rulings. I mean, my mouth dropped open, and so did the guy that I was representing. I thought, this guy, what ruling could he want that's higher than a Supreme Court ruling? And that's what's going on. What's happening is the county attorney is running the sheriff's office. He's advising the sheriff and advising the county clerk, Debbie Lathrop, on what to do, and he doesn't know himself. He doesn't even know himself.
So Danny doesn't even know what the Constitution says, so he can't stand up. So he'd leave it to a lawyer, which is and he's unelected. And the lawyer.
I guarantee you, Mark Voss told Danny Glick to stay out of it, and that's when the guy that owned that property went to the sheriff's office and asked him to come help him. The sheriff said they told him that we're staying out of it unless they have a court order. Well, now staying out of it is one thing, but standing back and watching the cops do it, that's a whole nother. That's misprision of felony.
Wow. I mean,
so.
isn't
this amazing?
Well, the lawyer's not even elected, so he's giving counsel to elected official that's supposed to know what elected official is supposed to know, and not go to the attorney every time for information that he should know.
Yes,
that's crazy.
Now, I'll give you another incident.
Okay.
A friend of mine, there's this thing called the Federal Liens Registration Act. The Federal Liens Registration Act says a lien is not valid from the IRS. A lien is not valid until a notice of lien is filed. Well, if the lien's got to be filed at the Secretary of State's office, and there is none, and you do a lien search and you find there's no liens, and here's what the IRS does. They go down to the county clerk's office and file a notice of lien. And if you read the notice of lien, it says, this is notice that you have a lien filed on you. Well, where's the lien filed? It's not filed where it's supposed to be filed, and it's not filed at the county clerk's office. But the notice of lien is filed down there. And I've gone down and warned them about this, and that's going to be part of, if I become sheriff, if I get elected sheriff, this stuff's going to end. This stuff's going to end because the Federal Liens Registration Act says a lien is not valid till a notice of lien is filed. Well, it stands to reason that a notice of lien is not valid if there is no lien.
Yeah.
You can't have it both ways.
Wow. So I think if a person keeps digging, you're going to find out how many people in our county are so fearful of the government. But here you are, you're a man that has stood up because you've been underneath the law, and the law has backed you up because that's what our basis of our foundation of this country is, the law.
It's a nation of laws, not men's opinions. And I ask everyone, because the people that are going to listen to this get on the internet. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, so if you get on the internet, this is what I want everybody listening to this to do. Get on the internet and look up Code of Federal Regulation list. Now, the Code of Federal Regulation list it's a list of all the Code of Federal Regulations, the titles. Look up the titles. Like Title I is general provisions. There's different ones. For instance, there's Indians. There's the Forest Service, agriculture, banking, all that. And Title 26 is Internal Revenue Service. Title 27 is alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. But what I want everybody to do is look up that list of all the list of Code of Federal Regulations, the title list. Then go to Title I, which is General Provisions, and go to 21.21C. And when you go there, it'll say right in there that it prohibits any agency using regulations from another agency. And that's exactly what the IRS is doing. They're using code sections, regulations out of ATF because they don't have any regulations that they can stand on. So they use the ones out of ATF, which is a total violation. It's further verified by Section 21.40. Further verifies that. And then go down to, if you get a chance, go down to the county clerk's office and say you want to look at the records of notices of federal tax liens because it's public record. Get a copy of somebody's notice of federal tax lien and look at the code sections on there. It'll say 6321, 6322, and 6323. Forget about 6322 because even though it's listed there, there's no statute backing it up. So look up, now go on to the internet and look up the government's table of parallel authorities. The parallel table of authorities has the United States Code on one side and on the other side the Code of Federal Regulations. And when you go down to that code section, 6321 and 6323, and go across the line, remember I showed you that?
I do.
And you go across and cross it, it says right in there, Title 27 ATF, Part 70. And if you read Part 70, it says the appropriate ATF officer. So there's 100% proof that they're violating the law and your constitutional rights, and they're misapplying the law.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you
I don't think. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
Oh no,
but
go ahead.
When I go to meet Richard Mack,
yes,
I'm taking all this stuff with me because I don't believe that he even knows this stuff.
You know, you when you told me you had gone through an IRS audit and you took you only 12 minutes, obviously, I mean, it's usually for hours for people. But when you knew the law, they kicked you out basically.
Well, this is what happened. Went up to the a friend of mine got a letter from the IRS and said they wanted to audit him. So I said, bring the letter in to me. It says we need to audit you. Please bring all your books and records on this date, and it's going to take four hours. I said, well, I'm going to write a letter for you, and I want you to sign it like if you wrote this letter and you send it back to him. So I wrote the letter, and the letter said, I'm looking forward to this audit. I will be there with all my books and records. However, I want you to, being as I'm bringing my books and records, I want you to bring the statute that says that applies to me, my liability. If you look up in the IRS code book, there's a one page called liability, and if you're not liable, then you don't have to pay a tax. I want you to show me my liability. I want you to show me a delegation order from the Secretary of the Treasury showing me that you've been delegated to audit me. And the fourth thing I ask him is Code Section 72. I've been sitting out here. I'm trying to think of the code section. 72, 20, 21, 70. I'll think of the code section.
Okay.
It'll come to me. 21. Anyways, you can look up this code section, and it says that any meeting you have with the IRS, you can record it if it has anything to do with any tax. 7321, that's what it is.
Okay.
Look up code section 7321. So he signed the letter, sent it off to him. He calls me back about a week or so later, and he says, Mike, they sent me a letter back, and it says that the courts have ruled against those arguments. And I said, well, what argument? You're asking them for information. They're asking you for information. Where's the argument? And I said, don't worry about it. I'll go up to the IRS office with you, and I'll run the recorder. And so we went up to the IRS office, and they knew something was up when we sent the letter back. So they called in this lady, Miss Van Howe from Lakewood, Colorado. And Miss Ellenson, B. Ellenson, is the lady up at the Cheyenne IRS office. So we go in there, and I'm running the recorder, and he does something that just blew me away. I mean, I didn't even think of this. Well, every time they send you one of these letters, they're computer generated. And so there's no signature, it just has her name. And he looks at Miss Ellenson. I told him before we went up there, I said, if you get stumped, you look at me, and if I'm smiling, you keep going. If I'm not smiling, I'll take over. Okay. He says, okay. So first thing we do is we go up, and I turn the recorder on, and I said, could we get your names? She gives me her name, Miss Ellenson, the other lady, Miss Van Howe. Miss Van Howe is the enforcer. This was a big woman, and I mean burly and everything, and you could tell she's the enforcer from Colorado. So they give us their names. We put our names on the tape, a recording, and then he starts in. I said, okay, start in. He looks over at Miss Ellenson. He says, Miss Ellenson, you sent me this letter, didn't you, about this audit? And she says, yes. He says, well, this name on here, it's like computer generated or typed. And he pulls a pen out and he shoves it over to her and he goes, would you mind signing this letter so I know you're the right Miss Ellenson? And she says, well, sure. So she's signing it, and Miss Van Howe's looking over at her, and you could tell the look on her face was, oh, geez, I should have told her not to sign anything. Because, see, this is how they get out of this in court. We beat them at this, take them into court, and you know what happens is they say to the judge, Your Honor, this is computer generated. There's no signature on it, and it was just a big mistake. Would you mind, shutting this down? And the judge says, dismissed. It's over. You see what I mean? Now you try that on your side. So anyways, he gets that signed, and I'm looking at him, and I'm thinking, wow, that was brilliant. I didn't even think of that. So then he starts in. I showed him 2 pages in the IRS code book, and if you have ever seen an IRS code book, they're about 2.5 inches thick or more. And there's one page I put a 3M sticky note in called liability for taxes. There's alcohol, tobacco, firearms, gasoline, wagering. There's 40 taxes that you could be liable for if you're involved in those special laws. And the other page that I marked is code section 6001 and 6011, because on her letter it says he has to pay all taxes he's liable for under code section 6001 and 6011. So I marked that page. Now keep in mind, this guy I'm going up there with, his name was Trent.
Okay.
The only 2 pages in the whole IRS code book he knows are those 2 pages. So he opens up the first page and he goes, Miss Ellenson, and he goes to liabilities. This is liability for taxes, and he turns the code book around so she can see it and shoves it toward her and says, would you show me under what section I'm liable for? And she looks down at that code book, and she looks at him, and she goes, we don't know anything about that code book. And he looks at me, and his mouth dropped open, and I gave him a big smile. And he looked back at her, and he took the code book, turned around, and he says, well, now this letter says I'm liable. I have to pay all taxes I'm liable for under code section 6001 and 6011. Is that correct? And she says, yes. He says, well, let's go there. So he looks at code section 6001, and it says, any person liable, and he stops right at that word, because I told him earlier, stop at liability. Don't go beyond liability, because what they're going to do is they're going to say to you, we'll show you your liability, but first you show us your books and records, and don't you do that. You stick with liability and make them show you your liability, because they won't be able to do it. So he says, 6001, any person liable. He stops at that word. There's that word, liable. So he says, let's look at 6011. It says, when the secretary determines a person to be liable, and he stops right there. Now, I told him later, you could have stopped at any person, because when it says any person, who's this any person? Is a 5-year-old child any person? Is a housewife that never works any person? Is a guy in jail any person? Who's this any person? See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So he goes there, and he says, now, he goes right back to liability. And he says, now, it says that I have to pay all tax I'm liable for. Now, under what section am I liable? And she looks down at that code book again and looks at him, and she says, you know more about that code book than we do. And then his mouth dropped open again, and he looked at me like, I can't believe what I'm hearing. And I smiled back at him, and he turns back around, and here she comes. Let me tell you, I don't have to show you where you're liable. I don't have to show you anything.
Oh.
So he pulls his checkbook out, slams it on the desk, and he says, let me tell you something, Miss Van Hal. I'm going to pay any taxes you say I owe. And if I don't have the money in the bank, I'm going to go take a loan out to cover it. But I'm not going to pay a tax I'm not liable for. Do you understand?
Mm-hmm.
And just then, both of those women stand up and they say, get out of here. And he starts to stand up, and I go, wait a minute. And they look at me, and I said, ladies, I got your names at the beginning of this tape, but I forgot to get your ID numbers. So they give us their names again and their ID numbers. Now think about this. This tape, at the very beginning of it, they're giving their names, and they're telling us they don't know anything about the Internal Revenue laws or this code book. And at the end of it, they give us their name and their ID numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have them all on record, audio records showing that they don't know what they're even talking about. So I stand up, I wrap the recorder up, we get right to the door, and I say, Trent. And he stops, and he looks back at me, and he's kind of puzzled. And I look back at them, and they were a little puzzled looking. And I said, didn't that letter say it's going to take 4 hours? And he said, yes. And I looked at my watch, and I said, new record, 12 minutes.
Wow.
And we walked out that door, and we got down in the parking lot. He wanted to sue him. And I said, no, these sleeping dogs lie. You probably won't hear another word from him.
Yeah. You know,
although he did hear something more. You know what he heard?
What's that?
What he heard was they went and filed a notice of federal tax lien on his property. So you know whose fault that is?
Who's that?
That's the county clerk's. That's Debbie Lathrop.
Okay.
Because Debbie Lathrop's job description says the only thing she can file is an original or a certified copy. And there's nothing certified about this. There's nothing at all certified about this. As a matter of fact, I have Debbie Lathrop on video coming right out of her own mouth saying, this other friend of mine says, you filed a notice of federal tax lien on me and it's phony. She said, there's nothing illegal about filing a phony lien.
Oh,
and I have her on tape.
Oh, my
gosh. I told
gosh.
you when I was talking to you the other day, I wish I'd had more time. I want to see you again here pretty soon because I want to show you this. Because when you see this video, I'd like to see somebody get it on Facebook and on YouTube before this next election.
Well, you give it to
Debbie
me.
Lathrop should not be the county clerk.
You give it to me, I'll get it up.
Okay.
Yeah, give it to me, I'll get it up. I'll work with it, and I got a little movie like type studio thing I got. And I can do some stuff.
Oh boy, I'll tell you what, it needs to get out because Debbie Lathrop has no business being the county clerk, and she's doing this because she gets paid.
Yeah.
And I also have on video John Johnson from the IRS going in there, and he goes in and he probes through all these records and finds people's names and stuff, and then he goes and files notices of federal tax liens on them. And there's been, it's just out of nowhere. They come up with these numbers out of nowhere. Like they say you owe $10,900. Where did they come up with that? What
Wow.
It's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
I still have a ton of stuff to show you. But,
well, I was
all
just
this knowledge.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just blown away by what you were just showing me. So, the wisdom, the knowledge that you understood, the way you could handle something. I was just like, wow, you don't find that every day.
Well, yeah, it's amazing. That's what I say, and it all to me. I want to kind of promote a book, and I think I told you about it, and I forgot to give it to you before you left.
Oh, okay.
And it's called "They Fired the First Shot," 2012. I want everybody listening, please get on Amazon and look at the book reviews on this book called "They Fired the First Shot," 2012, by a friend of Medjugorje. And it's the most phenomenal book, and it's divinely inspired, and it tells you everything that's going on in this country right now, from the government buying all these bullets up to the comfort room. That when you read about the comfort room in Barack Obama, about this abortion thing, this will really blow your mind. But it also says in this book, Our Lady calls sheriffs her Davids. You know, like David and Goliath. And she said the way to get out of this is we need to get constitutional sheriffs. It's very, very important to get constitutional sheriffs, and we do not have one in Laramie County right now.
Yeah, and here we are. We got John Cook in Weld County, and this man is standing up for the Constitution. I mean,
yes.
And I don't know if Danny Glick is underneath his desk afraid. Or
Let me tell you, I've had deputies come out of the woodwork. I've talked to 3 of them, and they've come to me. I didn't go to them, and they've come to me, and they've told me that he salivates at wanting to be the president of the National Sheriff's Association in Washington, D.C. Now think about that. So we're going to pay him in Laramie County to be the sheriff, and he's going to go to Washington, D.C. And you go down there to the sheriff's office, you talk to these deputies, they say he's never there. He's never there. Yeah. This one deputy told me the other day, he went in there and he said, whose car is that parked in Danny Glick's parking place? And nobody really knew except this one guy finally says, well, that's my car. And he says, well, what are you doing parked in Danny Glick's place? And he goes, what difference does it make? He's never here.
Oh, yeah.
Now that tells you something right there.
Big time. Yeah, that's really sad. So, all right, so if Danny Glick is never here, who is running the sheriff department then?
Well, he has an undersheriff.
Okay, all right.
But these guys are telling me there's no direction down there because there's so many different parts to the sheriff's office. There's the jail, which to me, as I mentioned to you the other day, how many people in that jail, if somebody went in and talked to them about God, might be converted?
True. Yeah,
might become a Christian. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And from what they told me, he's never set foot in there.
Huh.
And so I asked them, how many deputies are there in Laramie County? And they said, there's around 100. I said, you kidding me? There's 100 sheriff deputies? And he goes, yes. And he says, and there's probably 5 of them that think Danny's okay.
Yeah.
And that surprised me because as a person, I'm not running Danny Glick down. As a person, I think he's a nice guy.
Yeah.
But as a sheriff, he's really lacking.
Well, we have to hold our elected officials accountable when they're not holding up their right of when we elected them.
That's right. That's right.
I came across that blog you mentioned, Dump Danny Glick. It hasn't been updated a whole lot, but I did see it, so that was interesting.
Yeah, and that was brought to my attention by these deputies. I had no idea that was even on there. I was sitting with that one deputy, and he goes, get your smartphone out and get on the internet and ask or look up Dump Danny Glick. I couldn't believe what I was seeing.
Mm-hmm.
But that was put on there by deputies.
Well, I tell you, I personally believe that God is doing something bigger, and how should I put this?
Amen.
The church in general needs to wake up to what God's trying to do. My gosh, I mean, you're awake to what's going on. I'm awake. Emily is awake. Taylor Haynes is awake. Others are awake. Now we just need to have the rest of the church wake up because who's that one preacher here in town, McDaniel? What's his name?
Roger McDaniel.
Yeah, he is. Oh my gosh! I mean, he's for the homosexual agenda. He's for immigration reform. This man is not good news.
Do you remember what a few years ago when I think it was he and his wife that went to burn their marriage license on the Capitol.
True.
Capitol steps.
I heard about that.
Yeah, I mean, that to me was what? You're going against the doctrine, God's doctrines. When God says it's an abomination, it's an abomination. And nobody is born a homosexual. Nobody is. Mm-hmm. It's a choice.
Yep, that is very true. How can this man call himself a Christian pastor when he's blind leading the blind?
I know. It's sad. I see some of the articles he writes in the paper, and it makes you sick to your stomach.
Yeah. Well, I guess I have to say this. Even though I've been doing radio shows internationally, now I've been trying to find out more information here. I am finding all kinds of stuff that's just happening in our community that I want to expose because what's been done in secret will be shouted at the rooftops.
Yes. And then you know what? all these preachers, I don't care what religion it is, they better be getting up on their pulpits and start talking about how bad abortion is and all the rest of the stuff, all the other garbage, like the homosexual marriages and stuff like that. This is ruining this country. 2 men can't have a baby. 2 women can't have a baby. This is against God's law. And if you don't believe in God's law, what about the laws of nature?
Yeah.
And God made the laws of nature. But in this book, They Fired the First Shot 2012, he says, you don't have to follow man's law if it goes against God's law.
Very true.
I mean, think about it. Yeah, because if you're following man's law and it goes against God's law, then you're breaking God's law. And we're all gonna, think about this, Barry. 100 years from now, are you going to be down there looking up, or are you going to be up there looking down?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
You won't be actually. If you're up there, you won't be looking down. You'll be in such bliss that it's going to be phenomenal. I mean, you won't even think about it. But when you're down in hell, let me tell you. That's why I asked you to get on that. Did you ever get on there? MEJ.com?
No, I hadn't yet. It's been kind of busy. I hadn't had a chance.
Yeah, if you get a chance, you get on there and look up that heaven, purgatory, and hell, and just read the part about hell. Read the introduction to heaven, purgatory, and hell, because St. Faustina, her soul was taken by an angel to hell to show, God did this to show people, so she would write down what hell looked like. And when you read this, every person I've put it in front of and they've read it, they've said, oh my God, you're reading this and you're going, oh my God, oh, you don't want your worst enemy to go to hell. And to me, the one thing that really stood out, besides the absence of God when you're in hell, is the hopelessness. Mm-hmm. Just think, the hopelessness. You're there for eternity. I told my kids, you want to know what the eternity is? There's no way that the human mind can even begin to understand it. But go lock yourself in a dark closet, and no food, no sounds, no phones, no water, no anything. Dark closet, and do that for 24 hours. And they've said, well, you I don't think you could do it. I said, that's right. And any of you could do it. That's 24 hours. Now think about eternity. Now think about that forever and ever and ever. 10 million years from now, Satan walks in and you say, when am I getting out of here? And he says, you just walked in the door. Mm-hmm. We have no clue what eternity is. And I was telling you the other day, when God said he made us in his image, what he means is, part of it is that we're eternal. Our souls never die. Our bodies die, but our souls will never die. So therefore, you're either going to be eternally in hell or eternally in heaven. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of people who don't want to believe in purgatory. But let me ask you this, logically thinking. When, like in Maccabees, does your Bible have Maccabees?
No, I don't. I've heard of it.
Okay. Judas Maccabees, it's in the Old Testament. And it's in the original Bible. And Maccabees, there was a battle. And he said, we need to go pray for the dead. Now think about that. Mm-hmm. If you're praying for the dead, you can't pray for the people in hell because your prayers will not reach them. Mm-hmm. And why would you pray for the people in heaven? Because they're where you want to go. Mm-hmm. And so, therefore, you're praying for the people that are being purged of their sins, because it says right in the Bible, you can't stand before God until you're cleansed. But where are you going to be cleansed?
Very true. Yeah. I guess it's just so hard to find people that are willing to stand for God nowadays. I mean, we got pastors ducking underneath the pulpit because they're too afraid to say something that may offend somebody, and here you are saying, "Hey, this is like it is."
Either offend somebody or lose their tax status.
True. Is that so true?
I think that's some of it. I really think that's some of it. But you know what? They don't have to worry about that because a 501c3 is not in Title 26 Internal Revenue. Wow. I've looked it up.
I just seen
just like you've heard this.
Yeah,
cleanliness is not next to godliness. It's next to clean and cleanser. I looked it up.
I just seen an article where it says now IRS is not going to look at 501c3s as constitutional, which it's not in the Constitution anyways, or any of those regulations you talked about. So it's in a policy and it's not underneath the law, and so the IRS can do whatever they want with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, hey, Mike, is there anything else you'd like to share, or you're thinking about that you want to kind of go somewhere? Or?
No, I just want people to know. I probably talked their ear off, and I've done a little more talking than I should have. But I'm telling you right now, I had no aspirations to be a sheriff until all this stuff came down, and then it just, you know how it's divine guidance. You just know you got this feeling, you got to do this. And every time I've had a doubt, something happens. Like I get a call from Caritas, and I find out that Richard Mack wants to endorse me. So another day I thought, I started waning a little bit and thinking about it, and then bam, all of a sudden my brother comes in and says, there's 3 guys want to talk to you in the back room. And I go back to the back room of my dining room and in my business, and one guy says, are you Mike Tuttle? And I said, yes. He says, are you running for sheriff? And I said, yes. And he stands up and he pulls a sheriff's badge out and he says, we want to help you. And that to me was an inspiration right there. And I thought, well, I think God's wanting me to do this. And I'm telling you, if God wants me to be sheriff, I'm going to be sheriff. But if God doesn't want me to be sheriff, I accept that and I understand. But it just kills me to see this country go to the dogs. Satan has got. Our Lady has said that in January of 2000, Satan was unchained. Mm-hmm. And you know what's ironic? I think we were talking about this the other day too. Isn't it interesting that a woman and a man screwed it all up for us? The woman. This is interesting too. Why did Satan go to Eve to eat the forbidden fruit? Because she's the weaker of the 2 sexes. Mm-hmm. And so, but who was weak? If he'd have gone to Adam, Adam would have gone to God. But he went to Eve. But who did Eve go to? And who broke up? I mean, who gave in to Eve? Adam.
Yeah, Adam.
And when you think about this now, who's the new Adam and Eve but Jesus and Mary? And I'm not saying Mary on the same level any time. Neither would Mary, that she's on the same level at any time with Jesus. I'm saying that Mary, it says in the Bible, will crush the serpent's head. Mm-hmm. And when you think about that, how ironic that is, that here's the serpent trying to destroy mankind through a woman, and yet it's going to be a woman that's going to destroy Satan.
Yeah. Well,
God does have a sense of humor.
Yeah. Well, you know, I was telling my pastor about you and Sunday and mentioned a few things, and he said, you know, this sounds like a good fight to get into because you have a man that's willing to be a leader that is willing to put God first, you know, looking to get prayer back in the schools and, you know, just to put God back in the center. I mean, you know, the freedom to worship in our country as we had, you know, way back when, to have the freedom of speech, to have the freedom to even be well armed, you know, I think that so often we get caught up on, well, this person, he stands for this or that person. My gosh, we got a leader in front of us that's willing to stand for the Constitution and for God. Why not back a man like that? I mean, when it comes to, you know, when it comes down to it, if somebody's going to feed you some food and you're hungry, you know, are you going to say, well, this person's this or that person's that? No, you're going to take the food because they're willing to help you. And that's what I guess what I want to get across to people, Mike, is that you're willing to serve the people. You're willing to lay your life down for them. You're willing to put God first, the Constitution, and you're willing to look over their welfare. And it's like, my gosh, I mean, I would believe that would be a man sent from God that would be willing to help us. I mean, you know, and I think,
like I said, God never puts you you never put yourself in a position that God can't get you out of, but you've got to turn to God.
True.
And that's the only way we're going to get out of this is to turn to God. And if people would just, when you get up in the morning, get on your knees and thank God for this day and ask Him to help you through the day. And before you go to bed at night, get on your knees next to your bed and thank God for the day you had. Man. And for all the blessings He's given you. And I'll tell you what, it would change so fast in this nation if people would just do that. But unfortunately, there's been so many generations now that have been on the welfare dole and not, you know, the more you don't work, the more you won't work. And you've got to have the will to work, and you've got to understand that it's a sin for sloth and all these terrible sins that people they don't realize that you have free will. God never messes with your free will, never, unless you ask Him into your life to help you, because that's what free will is. And you know, those visionaries got to ask Our Lady, if God is so merciful, why do people go to hell? And she said, the people that go to hell are those who hate and curse God. And you've just got to realize, people have got to realize that it's all up to you.
Yep.
She says, when your final day comes, your final hour comes, you will face divine justice, and divine justice will ask you, where do you belong? And you won't be able to lie. And you know, there's so many people out there that think, well, when the time comes close, I'll change, or I'll do something different. No, you won't know your time. You will not know your time. And nobody knows when they're going to get in a car wreck, you know? So it's so important that you understand that you're in charge of your own destiny. You're the one that decides if you're going to. Jesus said, it's whatever you will. Judas did not will to do good. Judas did so many terrible things, and he did not will to do good. And Jesus said, if you just would have willed to do good, and if you just, Judas could have been saved after he betrayed Jesus. If he just would have said to Jesus, I'm sorry, I sinned, please forgive me, have mercy on me. Because the ultimate sin, the sin, are you still there?
Oh, I'm just listening to what you're saying.
I heard it click in my phone. In my phone. You know what the sin of the Holy Spirit is, don't you?
Blasphemy of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, there's one sin that cannot be forgiven, the sin of the Holy Spirit. You know what that is?
That's
believing.
Rejecting Him.
That's what? Yes.
Like, yeah.
That's believing. That's believing that you can't be forgiven.
Yeah.
And everyone can be forgiven. I don't care what you've done in your life. I don't care what you've done. If you ask for forgiveness, I told my children this. You can be the biggest jerk in the world and lived a terrible life, and at the end, you know, change your ways and change your heart, and you can be saved. Or you can be the greatest person in the world, and at the end of your life, change your life and be one of the worst people and start doing Satan's work, and you won't be saved.
True.
Because it's not what you did in the past, it's what you are right now. What are you right now? That's why you've got to change immediately if you're not in God's graces. I like what was her name that was burned at the stake? What's her name? Joan of Arc.
Yeah,
Joan of Arc.
Yeah.
Before they burned her at the stake, they were trying to get her on something, so they could be justified. And she was asked, "Are you in state of grace?" And she said, "If I'm in a state of grace, I ask God to keep me there. If I'm not in a state of grace, I ask God to put me there." So no matter what, so they couldn't do it. You know, see what I'm saying?
Yep.
She gave the right answer no matter what. Because the state of grace, you put yourself in a state of grace by doing good, doing what God wants you to do. Prayer is so important.
Mike, thank you.
But anyways.
Yeah, anything else you want to share before we
No, that's about it tonight. But I'll tell you what, I enjoyed this, and I hope I didn't, blather on too much. But I just love God, and I love my country, and I love this state, and I love this county, and I love the people here, and I just hate to see the feds come in and just start tearing everything apart, because we have a 10th Amendment in our Constitution, and that's what protects us. And our sheriff is our first line of defense and our last line of defense, but you gotta have a good sheriff. And I'll die for the people of this county if that's what it takes. But I love Wyoming, and I just hope I get the chance to show it.
Mike, I think that was really good. You don't hear stuff like that in normal churches anymore. You don't hear that.
No, you don't. You don't hear people living their faith as much as we should. There's a lot of people that love God, but loving God is not, it's not saying you love God, it's living. You know,
Yeah, very
it's
true.
showing people by your actions, not by your words.
You know,
Your words are part of it, but we got to get back to land patents. You can't get a land patent, but you can get a declaration of land patent, and we need to get back to those because, and just to put a thought in everybody's mind before I go tonight, think about this. If you had $200,000 and you paid it for your property, and your property is all paid off, well, it doesn't matter if it's paid off or not, but as an example, you went and you bought a piece of property with a home on it, and you paid $200,000 for it, and it's all paid off. Now the taxes on it are $1,000 a year, and you don't pay that for 5 years. My question is, can they take that property away from you? And if they can, how can you say you owned it? But a land patent is what we got to get back to declaration of land patents. And I ask everybody to get on the internet and look up land patent. Yeah, because we need to get back to what this country was all founded on, and that is the ownership of property. Well, and if anybody liked what I had to say tonight, and it's, you know, all I need people to be able to put my signs in their yards and stuff like that, and you know, just spread the word, because we gotta get a constitutional sheriff. And I'm telling you right now, it's coming from heaven that we need. If we're going to change it, we've got to change it ourselves. We've got to change it with the help of God, but we've got to change it with prayer and with fasting and with just doing the right thing. Love God and be good. I guess that's what I ended with. Love God and be good.